Hello and welcome back to another episode of DF Direct Weekly. I'm John Linneman. This is episode 14. And as always, I am joined to discuss the latest and greatest things in the world of video game technology and other tangential things by my friends and colleagues, starting with Alex Battaglia over in Berlin.
Hey there, John. I've got my coffee, which I really need today, and I'm good to go.
Excellent. You're ready to rock. And of course, we can't have the DF Direct Weekly without the man himself. I'm talking about Richard Leadbetter. Welcome, Richard.
Oh, John, yeah, and I'm looking at the docket, and there's a huge amount of big news this week, so let's get to it.
First on the agenda, the big one to discuss today, officially, God of War Ragnarok, I suppose, has been delayed. And along with that, some additional information has arisen regarding that and other future PlayStation 5 titles. And it's kind of an interesting situation. What do you think about that, Rich?
I think God of War being delayed, I don't think it's a huge surprise, bearing in mind current conditions. I think the big surprise is that not just God of War, but also Gran Turismo 7 have been announced as cross-gen titles, so they're going to be appearing on PlayStation 4 Pro and PlayStation 5, and it's causing a lot of controversy because Sony has really doubled down hard on this concept that this is a new console generation. And maybe, at launch, when you've got stuff like Miles Morales, which ran on both systems, Sackboy, those games would have been developed primarily on PlayStation 4 and then sort of, moved on to PlayStation 5. But the impression we were kind of given at the PlayStation 5 reveal, certainly in the case of Gran Turismo 7, which had PlayStation 5 labeling on it, PlayStation 5 exclusive, no less, looks like they're embracing a cross-generation strategy that we weren't fully aware of and that, Microsoft were fully upfront with their own first-party titles. So it's a difficult one.
Yeah, because it feels like they were trading on the fact that it was going to be a shift to a new generation, and then it's like, oh, actually, you know what? These are cross-gen games. I understand it. I get the business side behind it, but for me personally, it is disappointing. I mean, we took Microsoft to task for this last year, and I feel exactly the same here. I do not appreciate or enjoy the fact that games like this are still targeting the old platforms, only in the sense that, it's just weird. It kind of breaks with tradition, I guess, for these consoles, and it feels like, there's potential there that could have been exploited that maybe isn't possible now. But I guess with the expense behind these productions now and the amount of time spent making them, I guess it's a little different in that sense. I assume that all of these have been in development for years now. So, and I'm sure they were not started with PlayStation 5 specifically in mind, but it doesn't really change the kind of disappointment behind it. Because, we've seen, I think it's worth pointing out because, so Insomniac's launching Ratchet and Clank soon, and we've seen all the pre-release media. There's stuff that they're doing in that game, decisions that were made about the game design, that fundamentally I don't think would work on a last-gen machine. And they're really interesting concepts, stuff that kind of flips the game on its head in some interesting ways. And it's not to say that the other designers for, like God of War and such would have anything quite like that in mind per se, but it kind of means that they couldn't actually take that route forward because the game is going to need to work on a PlayStation 4.
Basically, there are going to be baseline systems for animation, for physical interactivity that are going to have to be limited to maintain a similar game experience across the PlayStation 4 to PlayStation 5. It doesn't mean every game needs Ratchet and Clank style world changing and things like that, but just the CPU difference between these generation of consoles should not be understressed. Things on the GPU side can scale really, really well. Maybe that's how something like Horizon Forbidden West is going to function too, where the base gameplay is relatively the same. It's just a lot less pretty on the PlayStation 4 or PS4 Pro. But for, it's just, I'm disappointed because I really do like seeing tech advanced and not be once again dragging by the heels of something, 2012 tablet level CPUs at this point, and just being brutal about it. Like, it's just, the games could have been so much more as a result. I still think they're going to be pretty, though. They're going to be awesome looking games, but
they're not gonna. This shouldn't affect the visuals. The presentation is probably going to look unbelievably impressive either way. That's not what we're talking about here. It's just fundamental design elements. And what about like Gran Turismo 7, for instance? Fundamentally, it's a driving game. There isn't anything necessarily that needs to be revolutionary about it. And if they're doing, ray tracing on PS5, just removing that, lowering the resolution, some detail, I can see how they would get to PlayStation 4 with relative ease. But it also means that they couldn't do anything like the GT series has always had a lot of loading times, and it's not just about shortening the loading times. They could have fundamentally changed the way their UI works at like a conceptual level and like tackled like getting in and out of the cars and the races in a completely different way that was not feasible before. Whereas now, if it's going to be cross-gen, then for sure it's almost certainly just going to be, here's the same types of menus, here's a loading screen, only it's really short now, stuff like that, which it doesn't really, none of this speaks to the quality of the games themselves, but it definitely means that we're not going to see anything necessarily pushing boundaries.
Well, I think, John, I think the issue with Gran Turismo is that I'm pretty sure that Polyphony Digital across the generations has been considerably upgrading the physics model, and the opportunity that's offered by the Zen 2 CPU to improve fidelity, to improve the quality of the physics over what they're doing with Jaguar, I'd say that's pretty huge. And the question I've got is whether that opportunity is going to be able to be explored if this is a cross-gen title. So yeah, I'm kind of concerned about that over and above the other stuff, and just the whole concept that these games have to. I mean, it's not just the CPU. The mechanical hard drive is such a huge bottleneck in so many different ways. So, for example, God of War, in terms of the kind of environments they'll be able to stream, it's going to be necessarily limited to accommodate a mechanical hard drive. I mean, it's going to have to be brutally pared back if we really want to see PlayStation 5 pushed to the max. But I think, we can talk about the hypotheticals all day, but fundamentally, this is not the PlayStation 5 dream that was sold to us. Now, to be fair, we have had PS5 specific titles. We've had Demon Souls, we've had Returnal. Obviously, we've got Ratchet. So, it's not all doom and gloom. But, when we're talking about Gran Turismo, when we're talking about God of War, these are titles that really, really pushed PlayStation 4.
I think the key is that this is a shift from what they've done in the past. This has not happened before, where we've had big first party titles spread out across console generations in this way. And it's kind of new for both Microsoft and Sony. I mean, Microsoft more so had cross-gen in the past, like, Rise of the Tomb Raider, they had Titanfall, stuff like that. But a lot of their big, impressive titles were definitely not cross-gen. And I don't know. I mean, I guess it makes me wonder about how confident these console manufacturers were in this new generation. If this was all factored into like the chip shortages, where it's like, okay, we can't get the supply out there. Maybe budgets of the games are just so astronomical at this point that it's difficult to justify targeting only a small user base like in the past. I mean, there's so many elements at play that I can see why it turned out this way, but I appreciate that, Xbox was pretty upfront about it. I was disappointed with it, but they were pretty much like, yep, this is cross-gen, and it's kind of not happening here, where it's like slowly being revealed that actually these games they're coming to PS4.
So I guess, the question is, are they going to scale down or are they going to scale up? And we don't really know when these decisions were made as to whether they were cross-gen or not. I would suspect that God of War probably was developed initially on PS4. GT7, though, one would imagine that Polyphony Digital would have had very early access to PlayStation 5. And you know what Kazunori Yamauchi's like in terms of really pushing boundaries. So, Yeah, really difficult. This is one where we don't really know what's going on behind the scenes in terms of the decision making, but certainly it is at odds with the messaging.
That's important to note. We're just like spitballing here, like nothing. We don't know anything about what's going on behind here. This is just us getting opinions out there. So I'm sure we'll see. We'll revisit all of this as the games actually ship. You know, we're not talking about the quality of any of these games here, whether it's, you know, God of War, Halo Infinite, or any of those. We have to wait and see the final product before judging. It's just, you know, there is some inherent disappointment with this decision for us, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But that's probably enough spitballing about that topic. We should probably move on to another, well, I don't know if it's rosier, but a different topic entirely. Next up, at long last, so there's a few things to reveal here, but the big thing is AMD finally sort of showcased or discussed what their FSR solution is. So this is their new sort of, I think the tech press has often referred to this as a DLSS competitor, but in reality, it's kind of its own thing and sort of another tool in the toolbox for their Fidelity FX package. And I think, Alex, this is something that perhaps you've been following the most closely. So what are your first impressions on FSR, given, you know, we haven't actually seen this in real world examples outside of some screenshots. We haven't tested it. So just first thoughts.
First thoughts, reading without even looking. They initially announced or have said that it is a spatial upscaling technique, and I'm as a result of that, I'm a little bit reluctant to call it reconstruction in the same vein as DLSS, because if you look across a variety of industries, not just the video game one, but denoising for offline rendering uses previous samples and things like that. Reconstruction, as it's modernly thought about, image reconstruction is in its highest quality form, looking at something that happened in the past to try and gather more information about the current frame. And the fact that it's not going to be doing that does actually put an upper limit on the level of quality that the Resolve can get, how close it can actually look. It has more similarities, FSR, currently with DLSS 1.0 in the way they've announced it so far, where DLSS 1.0 was, for the most part, actually a generative neural network where it was looking mostly at one frame and trying to generate anti-aliasing and upscaling from that one frame in image space. It was using motion vectors for some aspects of the training and kind of getting a better understanding of motion across the scenes, but it wasn't actually jittering the frame and resolving a higher quality image in that grid, which also FSR is not doing. So I honestly, in terms of my expectations of what kind of level of quality we're going to get here, I really think it's going to be like DLSS 1.0-esque level of image resolve at best, because, you know, DLSS 1.0 was also using machine learning to get a better understanding of like, oh, this is a wire, so it needs to be a full line and things like that. We don't know if this is using machine learning. I kind of doubt it because they didn't announce it as a part of it.
Well, they showed it running on a GTX 1060.
Yeah,
which kind of rules that out, I'd say.
Yeah.
So the thing about that, though, I thought was interesting is the way they initially presented it made it seem like, oh yeah, this is a very platform agnostic thing. We're targeting it for all platforms. But then they later kind of walked that back in the sense that, yes, it can work on NVIDIA cards, but there's no special work being done there or anything like that, which is reasonable to expect. But the way they initially presented it made it seem like it was actually, I don't know, it felt like they were trying to get good press out of that initial showing, being cross platform agnostic, and then they kind of rolled it back a little bit. That's all.
Well, in terms of how they showed this off, if I was demoing an image reconstruction technique, I probably wouldn't have done it the way they did if I was very confident in my product, to be completely honest. Because just look at the way NVIDIA, ever since DLSS 2.0 has come out, how they show it off, where they have a video where it'll move along, and it's just not a moving image. They'll stop and they'll focus in on an aspect of image quality, whether it be like edges, or whether it be texture detail, whether it be blur or ghost. ghosting, and they show the DLSS 2.0 difference. And they're going to point out the positive things. They're not going to show the DLSS failure cases usually. But, that's easily, you don't even need the zooming usually to see that kind of thing. Here, though, that GTX 1060 1440p quality mode footage just looked not good at all.
And the still shots they shared from Godfall, I think it was, they were, I couldn't find anything that wasn't terribly compressed, though maybe there are original source files, but it's more that all of those shots were demonstrated in motion with the motion blur fully active in a way that kind of conceals. It's difficult to look at the various test cases across the image itself to understand how it actually works. The end result is just that based on their demonstration, it looks blurry and still noticeably lower res. It doesn't seem to benefit it. And I can't, as a spatial solution, I'm baffled as to why. We've seen so many other engine developers, aside from DLSS, Unreal Engine has its temporal upsampling. A lot of other engines and developers have created their own sort of motion vector driven, temporal upscale solutions that are effective already. So I'm struggling to imagine a use case where this would really make a lot of sense. People are saying, well, hopefully we'll get this on consoles as well. And there has been discussion of that as part of the Fidelity Effects suite. But let's say you're Insomniac or something. Why would you look at this versus say what they're already doing? You know what I mean?
It's also, if you already have TAA in your engine, why would you look at this? Because implementing TAA upsampling is just the next logical step. And we'll be seeing that across, this entire gen. Tons of games will end up using that technique.
Well, essentially, I think the shots that I saw that were released were unconvincing. The stuff that kind of passed muster was low contrast material, which hides high fidelity, high frequency detail. The one shot I did see, which was having a lot of high frequency detail, foliage, for example, it was clearly not even at 100% when we saw the shot running at a lower resolution. So, I can't say I was massively impressed. But what I will say is that they're doing something that nobody else is doing. So either there's a really good idea here, or it's, it's something that maybe other people should be taking a look at, or maybe it's just not really going to gain momentum. It's just too early to say because we just don't have any kind of decent quality A to B comparisons to look at. Now, we should have something to look at June 22nd. I'm going to be very curious to see if AMD gives early previews to the press to do this. Because, when we look at the original DLSS, NVIDIA were fairly open with it. We had the Final Fantasy 15 demo and also Epic Infiltrator. And we got a really good cross-section of opinion from the entire tech press there. Everybody got access to that demo with their RTX cards. So this was, a really good, you could see the strengths and the weaknesses. You could see that there was potential in the technology. You could see that extra detail was being resolved, but at the same time, you could see that there were areas where it wasn't quite passing muster.
Yeah, I mean, we were able to directly pixel count shots.
Exactly.
Right.
Cuts. You could see that, pixel count is still exactly what it was originally, so 1440p. So, which is something that's changed, obviously, with 2.0.
So, on the one hand, I'm a bit disappointed that more material wasn't released. On the other, AMD had a stacked show with a ton of stuff that they wanted to get across. So they would only have had, a certain amount of time allocated to this. And obviously, I think the main message from it was, more coming soon. Check it out, which I think is the approach we need to take. Because, at that point, there will be, it should, in theory, be open access to everybody. And then we can actually see what this technology is all about. And I think the other great thing about it is, let's say that it is pretty awesome. Let's say that it is a DLSS competitor. It's going to be open source, which means that people will be able to access that code and integrate it, perhaps even adapt it and improve it. So maybe there is some kind of fork in the whole smart upscaling journey here that could lead to something interesting. But I can't say I was massively impressed with those initial materials. So still all to prove, but I guess at least we've seen something now, and at least we have a release date for when we're going to actually be able to test something. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what you've got to say about it, Alex.
Yeah, for this, I mean, it's going to be Godfall, right? So I can already lay out how I'm going to do it. That I'm going to use Unreal Engine's Unlocker, and I'm also going to compare it to native as well as using TAA upsampling, because you can do that with Unreal Engine.
Does the Unlocker unlock DLSS?
They need to have already had it plugged into the project.
Right. So probably not then.
So probably, unfortunately, not, unless they did, and it's just sitting there inside the project, which would be funny. But I doubt it. That would be funny. But no, so I'm gonna TAA upsampling versus native versus one or two of the modes. I mean, it seems like they've got like 4, like ultra, quality, performance, and balance. It's kind of like the gamut of ultra performance, balance, and quality that we see. But I imagine maybe their quality mode or their ultra mode is perhaps a little bit higher res than 1440p, I'd imagine, based upon what I saw there. I wouldn't be surprised about that. But once again, we'll see. But my initial contact with this, based upon what I understand about reconstruction techniques, is that I don't want to get my expectations high for this, and I don't think people in the audience should either.
Okay, well, that's pretty harsh.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah, well.
It's all going to come out in the testing, really, isn't it? It's
it'll come out. It'll come out, but I like being surprised.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing about the different image quality settings as well. I'm very curious about how it scales and whether it is just the base resolution that's the differentiating factor there. Also, kind of curious as if you can use Unreal Engine's temporal upscaling solution, whether you could use it in combination with FSR and what that's going to look like.
I don't know about that, actually, because so the thing about FSR currently, if it is a spatial solution and it's doing something to bring the image up to native quality, that means they are maybe putting it as a contrasting option to TAA upsampling. Like they think it'll be good for devs that don't want to use TAA. Maybe it doesn't integrate nicely with TAA in general. Anyways, these are things that will, maybe we can ask questions to get some answers there.
The problem is that everybody is using TAA now. Who isn't using TAA? The developers of Neo. That's it so far, isn't it?
Yeah, it's there's I guess some VR games aren't using TAA. Now there's some of them using DLSS. So yeah, TAA is all encompassing. It is a little different to see some technique not advocating for its obvious strengths. So,
I mean, there was other AMD stuff that they revealed. Plenty of it.
Cache stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So essentially, they're looking to add 3D cache to their Zen processors. And it is quite interesting that when you look at the processor layout, the die shot of any CPU at the moment, there's like a tiny core and a gigantic amount of cache. And they're doubling down on cache here. So I'm very curious to see what this is going to do, because they're actually going to be rolling it out for the existing generation Ryzen 5000 chips. I assume there'll be like XT models or something, even better than, some sort of bizarre branding to sort of emphasize the new stack cache system. But yeah, I mean, fair dues to AMD. They are on a roll with their CPUs at the moment. And this is going to be very interesting. I mean, it's a sizable silicon investment that must therefore be coming with a significant performance uplift. So, I was kind of looking forward to seeing what Intel have going with Alder Lake. And I'm wondering whether they're going to get trumped with this. But certainly exciting times. And I guess the other thing that's exciting is in terms of the RDNA 2 rollout, they're actually putting out a lot more processors. So typically, way back when, AMD's strategy was basically to introduce a new die, produce new products from that, and basically rely on the old technology to fill out the rest of the stack. So, God knows how long we had the Polaris chip with the RX 580, the 480, 590, it goes on. But this time they actually seem to be rolling out multiple processors based on RDNA 2 across the entire stack. It looks like they've got something really interesting happening in gaming laptops as well with the 6800M. So I'm looking forward to seeing what that's all about. So yeah, what I will say is obviously because of the nature of what we talk about here at Digital Foundry, FSR has dominated the discussion, but just on a general trajectory, AMD are going stratospheric. I think we should quickly just talk about some of the questions that have come up about FSR. Russell Brown is basically wondering whether it's an evolving technology that will compete with DLSS. I think it would need to evolve quite significantly in the way that DLSS has. Which so far, it's still early days. We can't really say that. He does say that we're all attractive, though, which is a very nice thing for him to say. I'm not sure I fully agree with that.
Just Alex and Tom.
Max van der Molen was asking about what our expectations are. I think we've already gone through that. And I hope also that Kilkia123, Benjamin Mahoney, and Gustavo Fantini, I think we've all covered your FSR questions. So many of them this week. But I'm assuming there's going to be a ton more once we actually get to see the technology in action. So yeah, looking forward to that.
Busy weeks ahead, my goodness.
Yeah, I think, gentlemen, there will be a lot more to say about AMD coming up. And this is just sort of a taster of what they have on their plate. And when the time comes, more discussion shall occur, along with benchmarks, tests, and all the good stuff that I know Alex is excited to do especially. So, but we should move on to the next topic, because the next topic is a big one. I know you didn't expect it, but it was a very important day yesterday at the time of this recording. Gentlemen, Sony has released PlayStation 3 system software update version 4.88. That's right, it happened. What do you think about this, Chad?
Chad Warren's been looking at the games, right? Chad Warren all about games. Chad Warren just likes a system that's the best, right?
Can't argue with that. I agree. He just wants the best. Don't we all?
Well, I do wonder about this whole PS5 cross-gen thing, whether it falls into his ABAP philosophy.
I don't know.
Where games have to be as ball-in as possible. ABAP.
I don't even know.
ABAP.
ABAP.
Yeah. So that came out. Not actually sure what it does. There was some initial hope that maybe it would address the battery issue
that we talked about before.
I haven't confirmed one way or another if it did. I doubt it, but that would be interesting. And I'm also it's an interesting thing for this to come out, because usually these are like security patches to plug any holes, but at this point it's just weird timing. And maybe it is that. Maybe because they decided to keep the store open, they were like, oh yeah, we have to fix some of these back end issues here and update the system. Maybe it's that. I don't know.
I'm curious also about what it does, but I guess this is the first time we've seen Sony reaching so far back. It's not like they could firmware update the PS2, so.
No, the furthest they could go back is like update the PSP, but I don't think they've done that in a while. So yeah, it's very interesting. But yes, with that bombshell out of the way, let's move on to the next topic. All right, so this is actually another pseudo bombshell. Not really. This is exciting though. This is something we've all been waiting for. So Doom Eternal, we finally got a peek at what the ray tracing implementation is. And now this is especially interesting because I asked about this, I guess it was early last year, one of my last trips before the pandemic. Went up to check out Doom Eternal before it was released and got to talk about it. And at the time they had announced ray tracing was coming.
Yeah, for a while.
There wasn't any indication as to what it would be. and it was sort of indicated that perhaps it might be something less traditional, but they didn't know. It was all just experiments. But fundamentally they decided to opt for ray traced reflections, and in this case, I guess I actually think that's a pretty good decision, because looking at the trailer footage they've showcased, first of all, it's highly performant based on that initial trailer, but beyond that, Doom Eternal itself has a lot of shiny materials. Like, they are everywhere. And by essentially using ray tracing to handle those reflections, it really grounds that world in a way that's really satisfying to see. I mean, everything from the weapons to just like little trim pieces on the door to just everything now is reflective. And I mean, what do you think about it, Alex? I mean, this is cool, right?
It's what I actually imagined what they'd originally do, but then they kind of hinted that it might be something less traditional. So I was thinking, like, what else could they do to really enhance the graphics?
Right.
But I think it works perfect for the art. When I played Doom Eternal and beat it, I just kept thinking on all these levels, like, ooh, it would look so good with like proper reflections, off-screen reflections. And looking at the footage, there's some really cool stuff in there. Looks like all particles are part of the reflections, at least the non-GPU particles that are part of the reflections. So
right.
And there's a lot of glass on a lot of levels too, which otherwise would have just been rather plain cube maps, if anything at all. So this is a pretty big upgrade. I'm just curious, I guess, now to see how it all ties together in the end with DLSS, which they are also supporting too. See what that
they
looks
showed
like.
it running without DLSS, I believe, and the frame rates
right.
were already around 100 frames per second on what do you remember what the card was?
3080 Ti.
30, of course, it was because of the reveal of the 3080 Ti. So obviously.
So if you go back in time and you look at the what was it, Wolfenstein Young Blood, that one had. I wonder if they're using similar reflections to that, because that was extremely performant. I'm pretty sure like a 2080 Ti can do just about 4K 60. That's really good. Yeah.
For a game that's already out, though, that's been out for a year or so and has these expansions, it kind of makes sense to go with something, I don't want to say conservative, but something like this, because the game was architected with a very specific art style. I'm sure they could have explored things like global illumination, ray trace shadows, all kinds of different things. But with the way the game's art was created and the way the game looks, I'm not sure that would have necessarily made the most sense to implement into an already finished game like this. So, and reflections were kind of the only like thing I think that could have really benefited at this point. And also, I don't know if do we know if they have like a console version in the works as well? Because perhaps this is something they could implement there. If it's already this performant on PC, theoretically you could see them implementing ray trace reflections into the console versions as well. Maybe like quarter resolution or even lower potentially. I don't know. But that could be an interesting thing as well.
If they've got that kind of performance, then they could certainly do it on console. They may, but may need to lean into a bit more into DRS. And I'm pretty sure that any kind of ray tracing work being done by id Software at this point would need to roll into a future edition of the engine that would be aiming primarily at consoles. So
that's true.
Yeah, I do think that it is kind of going to roll out to consoles. Whether Doom Eternal gets the upgrade, I don't know.
Oh yeah, well specifically that's what I'm talking about. I'm hopeful that they get an upgrade for the consoles, and I would love to see like a complete version of the game even released like on disc with all content, because the DLC is really awesome as well. So they've done a really good job at supporting this game, I think, since it was released last year. Tons of great new content. The game itself is long and extremely well made. So ray tracing is like the cherry on top of an already super performant, beautiful game.
Haven't they already announced that there's going to be a next-gen console version of Doom Eternal? I'm not sure.
They might have. I can't remember off the top of my head. That's the thing.
I think they have, actually. Yeah, I think they have.
Because this would be a perfect fit, really, wouldn't it?
I agree. I agree. And well, when and if that hits, so regardless, at least when one of this patch hits, we will definitely be revisiting the game. Also, maybe a chance to talk about that DLC, because there's some beautiful areas in those levels that are unlike anything we've seen in the regular game. So let's move on to the last news item for today. So this is kind of a big one, for me at least, or it's very interesting. So last year, Denon and Marantz and various other companies as well, actually, they released the first round of HDMI 2.1 compliant receivers, AV receivers. So I use an AV receiver for the surround sound setup. It's very common in a modern sort of home theater environment. The problem is, if in my case, so I also have the LG CX or C10 OLED. It's HDMI 2.1 compliant. But if you want to pass signals through the receiver to the TV, you also need a 2.1 compliant receiver. And that's what these were supposed to be. But then it was kind of discovered that the Panasonic Semiconductor Solutions chipset that all of these receivers use has a bug in it. Basically, it doesn't properly support fixed rate link, which is a feature used by Xbox Series X specifically. And there are ways to get these to work with PC on NVIDIA graphics cards, probably AMD, and then as well the PS5, because there's different ways to handle HDMI 2.1 video, but FRL is essentially the problem here, and the chipset didn't support it. They've now revealed that there is a fix coming, and predictably the fix is rather significant because this is not something you could fix with software. This is a chipset bug. So what they've announced is essentially board swaps. They are going to provide owners of these top-end 2.1 capable receivers with a new board that they can install or have installed into their AV receiver. That it basically replaces the video board with all the HDMI inputs, outputs, and all this kind of stuff on it to solve the problem. And then they will be selling new versions of these receivers as well without the bug. So that's a lot to say that this was quite a frustrating solution because there really aren't any other available options right now for those of us looking for a 2.1 compliant AVR. So I am happy at least that there does appear to be a chipset that is capable of handling this correctly. But boy, the what a roller coaster. What do you think about this, Rich?
It's pretty nuclear option, isn't it, to swap out
really
the
is.
board? And it's not going to be cheap for them. But at the same time, I think what's really surprising here is that there was no validation with the mainstream devices that were going to be using HDMI 2.1. So I'm just kind of mystified as to how we're in this position in the first place.
Yeah.
I guess this is the problem with developing a product before another product that's actually taking advantage of this is using it. Because it does technically support, you can do 4K 60, 444, you can do 8K technically, I believe. These things are feasible, but not with fixed rate link.
Okay.
And that was the issue. So at the same time, it would have, so we know that Microsoft had worked closely with LG prior to the launch of Series X to ensure compatibility there, right? And I'm surprised that there weren't more manufacturers, I guess, reaching out or trying to ensure that they would have compatibility with these new machines, given the state of things at this point. So I don't know. It's crazy that this happened, but that's just the way it seems to go with brand new standards like this.
Well, you know, it's just interesting that there's actually very little support for HDMI 2.1 generally outside of the screens themselves.
Yeah.
So, you know, even, you know, the stuff like Amazon HDMI splitters, there's still no sign of an HDMI 2.1 device. As far as I'm aware, capture devices, there's no plans.
There's none.
There's certainly none available at the moment. I'm not hearing any sort of news of product announcements. And
so this has created a real problem for me because I essentially have to plug and unplug my consoles from the TV to enjoy HDMI 2.1. So I have a little extender cable coming down. If I want to capture for work, I have to plug it into the receiver, which then goes out to the capture. And if I want to just play it and take advantage of HDMI 2.1, then I have to plug it directly into the TV, in which case then I'm also limiting the audio options. Like on the Xbox, I can't really use Dolby Atmos because there's also an issue with using the HDMI, whatever it's called.
The Atmos thing, yeah.
I'm forgetting the name right now, but essentially if it passes Atmos, if you plug into the TV and it passes Atmos over to the receiver, there's serious latency that occurs. So it's unusable. Like everything goes out of sync. So I'm stuck using regular Dolby Digital 5.1 right now. And that's unfortunate. So I found this whole situation a little bit annoying, and I'm glad that there's at least solutions on the horizon. But man, it's wild that nobody got this right except for select few TV manufacturers. Certainly not all of them, because like Sony launched some TVs last year that had serious issues with 2.1, including having or quartering the resolution or something when set to 444 4K. I think they still have this issue. VRR isn't supported on those screens, and in fact on many others. Like, the only one that really seems to have got this mostly right is LG at this point. So it's the state of things is interesting.
I'm also surprised there wasn't a 420 fallback for 4K 120, because that would fit within the bandwidth envelope for HDMI 2.0. So that would have been, it should be, yeah.
But I think that would be a 10-bit though. I think that's the problem.
Well, I'm just thinking about, just sort of being able to get the signal across. You're not going to get full fidelity or anything like that. It's just simply a case of being able to get 120 hertz if your device supports it. I mean, all of those HDMI 2.0 capture cards out there, in theory, they could take 4K 120 at 420. But yeah, it's just something I've just been mulling over recently, because we really would like to do 4K 120 content, but there simply isn't a device that can capture it.
With that out of the way, let's move on to the next section, where we talk a little bit about the content this week. It's been quite a shift this week, I guess. I'd spent the last week and a half working really hard on that last DF Retro episode, which finally came out, which was great. I'm really happy with the response to that one, and also the Quake episode, which finally went out for everybody else. And folks seem to have really enjoyed that one. I'm happy to hear it, because I put a lot of time and love into making that video. So I'm glad it's out there. And for now, though, I'm working on something else, which we'll talk about soon enough. But in the meantime, Alex, you were also working in the background on a rather epic video. I've seen the whole thing now, and it's really good.
Thanks.
You've completed your tech focus video on global illumination. And yeah, maybe you want to share a few thoughts on it now that the project is complete.
Yeah, this is kind of the first tech focus. I mean, I've done things that are similar to tech focus since the last official tech focus video, but this is one that's just all about a single technique, describing it theoretically and then with game examples. And here I focused on global illumination, first as a concept, what it means, what people really mean when they actually say that word, because it's not the same as the concept itself, due to just, what you practically want is different than what is part of a theoretical concept. And then talking about the way games have achieved global illumination-like effects in the pre-ray tracing era. I didn't want to cover ray tracing as a part of it, like implementations, because one, it would take a lot of time, and it's kind of going over, I would say, known ground at this point. I've talked a lot about ray trace global illumination in other videos before. So this one was about, okay, well, how did they do it in the past? And I had a really good time doing it. It takes a while to make one of these videos because it's all sitting in my brain. And I have an idea of scenes from certain video games, of techniques. I read papers, and I write out an entire script. And then this is very different than a normal project, where usually with a normal project, I'm gathering B-roll and then thinking of how it's scripted, and then maybe I come back to the game or games after the fact to grab some more specific shots. But this is all about, coming down into a script firsthand and then going out and getting the recordings. So it is very different. I say it's more time consuming by far. It took quite a while. I was doing weekend work on this and all these other things to make sure I got it out in a reasonable amount of time. But I really like it, and I hope people like it. Yeah.
So to be clear, this is going to be rolling out exclusively to DF Supporter Program, Premium tier and Retro tier supporters, but then once your next one is complete, that will be going public, similar to the way that the Quake episode has been rolling out. And again, this is a way that the supporter program allows us to do stuff that it's not really a slam dunk in terms of whether it's actually going to land well on YouTube, but stuff that we really want to do that we feel is important, and this all enables that. And I'm looking forward to seeing more from you, Alex. Any idea what the next topic is?
I mean, I'm almost thinking just tangentially that I might want to just do general reflections as a result after this. I do talk about a bit, reflections are part of global illumination, but I don't go into like all the different types and things like that have happened over the years. And this could be fun. That could also be fun.
Fair enough. So sticking on the topic of the support program, obviously DF Retro continues. So John, what's happening there?
Well, yeah, so obviously, we just released those last two videos. The PlayStation launch video, which is almost 3 hours long in the end. I think we're going to roll that out soon enough in sort of I guess the idea is to do it out in like 3 parts.
Because big.
Because 3 hours for a video on a channel like this, I don't know, that might be doomed to failure. So we're going to try doing it, like breaking it up by region perhaps, and see how that goes. But look for that soon on the public channel. But beyond that, Audie and I have come up with the next DF Retro idea. This one's a little less ambitious. Well, a lot less ambitious, actually, because we kind of have to do that ebb and flow. But it's still going to be an interesting topic. Also, last night, we recorded another DF Retro play. This time we played Flipnik Ultimate Pinball on PlayStation 2, which is just a tremendous and super underrated game that we wanted to highlight. Because it will bring you joy into your life. Of that, I am certain. And the Retro Corner stuff, and there's a lot of stuff happening there. And the actual Patreon Discord is just awesome. I love hanging out with those guys, and it's been a really great community. And I didn't realize how much I guess I wanted something like this for a while, just like a cool place to hang out and talk about this stuff, as opposed to like Twitter or something where, things tend to get a little bit more heated, but also there's less detail in the posts due to the limitations on characters. So it's not as an immediate fun discussion place. So I'm really appreciating that.
Yeah, it can sort of be a bit odd where you'll post something really fascinating about retro and then somebody would just reply, biomutant analysis. When is it coming?
Yeah, I'm just like, exactly. You finish something like, oh man, there we go. 2 weeks of hard work. We did it. We reached the finish line. First comment, biomutant win. And I'm just like,
at this point,
like,
never.
What am I even doing? What am I even doing? It's
very different.
It's a thing. So this has been good.
Mm-hmm.
Beyond that, beyond the projects, working on the retro stuff and the next projects for next week, I think both Alex and I have been playing around with Unreal Engine 5.
Yeah.
Starting to push around on it. It's a really interesting new technology. It also highlighted that something I already knew, I needed more memory for my machine, which has become a problem in Adobe software already.
Yeah.
And it is extremely evident here. They say the minimum for using the editor is 32 gigabytes. They recommend 64. And yeah, just exploring the map that whatever it's called, the Ancient Valley or whatever, loading that up and moving through the different grids and playing with it. It's very slow, but it still shows a lot of the potential here. I really appreciate just being able to drag and drop lights into the world and see them accurately, emit light and react on surfaces in ways that with Unreal Engine 4 specifically, like it was already powerful for visualizing what you were doing, but you often, most games still use a lot of baked lighting for one. And usually if you wanted to see the results of your lighting accurately represented as you see it in game, you need to bake things out. You have to wait for calculations. It was difficult sometimes to tweak the art to look exactly the way you might want it. And I found that out myself, just designing little things here and there and trying to see how it looks. And you can't just rely on that. But with Lumen specifically, it really allows you to sort of like really pre-visualize everything in a way that I'm very curious to see how the real artists working in this will benefit from this approach. And beyond that, of course, getting up close with nanite geometry and playing around with the different Megascan assets and dropping them into our own maps and toying around with that is cool. But I think the performance stuff, Alex, you're going to be doing a video on this as well. And I'm wondering if you're going to touch it. One thing, I think both of us tried to enable hardware accelerated ray tracing for like reflections and such, which currently, and I don't know if other people are having luck with this, but for us, it was kind of crashed and burned on the machines. Early access, though. But I'm more curious about this video that you have planned with all the performance stuff. So tell us about that.
So the idea was like, I do actually want to go in depth with UE5's Lumen and Nanite. More Lumen than Nanite, because Nanite's a little bit, cut and dry. We already kind of know what we're getting there. But with Lumen, it's a bit of a black box, and I've been toying around with it. I do want to go into depth with that at some point in the future, but there's so much going on right now that I could not invest the time in that. And it's also an evolving product. The early access version may not be feature complete, and I don't want to misrepresent what Lumen can do, because if other game developers watch a video that I put out about Lumen and I give a kind of an impression of an early version of it, and they're less than impressed or something like that, I don't want to do that. So basically here in this video, I just want to give a first contact of performance across just like a good couple GPUs and give an understanding of what we know from what Epic is telling us about how it's targeting next-gen systems, to get an understanding of what you may need to run this kind of demo, this Valley of the Ancients demo on a PC right now.
So the idea then is no formed conclusions here.
No,
this is literally just a fun, breezy first contact look at like, hey, here's this early access thing. Here's how it's running for us on these different pieces of hardware.
For sure. And, like I've been playing around with their TSR, their new version of TAA upsampling. I'm pretty interesting. It has, I can already see places where they need to work on it. I can already see things it does really well. It's really cool to see. But that is, once again, just something that is already kind of in the middle of development, and I don't want to give a completely well-rounded out opinion of it, because I want to compare it to DLSS, and DLSS has yet to be integrated in UE5. It's coming in the next couple of weeks, so we'll see, but there'll be UE5 coverage on the channel soon enough.
That's awesome.
Console analysis when?
Yeah, thank you, Rich. Yeah, just console analysis.
Yeah, it was funny. Somebody was asking like, hey, you guys should do a comparison of PC versus PlayStation 5 and Unreal Engine 5. And I'm just like...
Yeah, I saw your comment, Chad. That was good.
I'm just like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's...
You can tell me when we can do that.
That's it.
Yeah.
I'm very curious to see what that even means. I love it. Keep them coming. I'm
curious about the CPU implication as well, Alex. So I don't know if you've thought about running it on the Ryzen 3600, which is...
I'm going to do that for the mid-range GPUs because it makes testing for me easier instead of just swapping on the 10900K machine. But yeah, I think... Honestly, looking at what I'm seeing at the CPU utilization, it seems fine enough. It's actually not as heavy as you may think. I don't think the big setup costs probably start happening if the scene had a ton of non-instanced objects. I think it's a little bit confusing for most people when they look at these UE5 scenes. We had Lumen in the land of Nanite last year, and everyone was like, how is this even running at all? You must need a PS5 level SSD to get all that in memory. But if you've been watching the UE5 streams, which are really long, amazing content, by the way, like 2.5 hours, like Michael Valiant and all these other people there working on it, and they describe it like actually the way Lumen and Nanite work is they're not as heavy as you may think because they're doing a lot of instancing and they're all virtualized, like a virtualized texture system. So it's only streaming in stuff that you really need to see. And it's not even very large stuff necessarily because they're trying to keep the individual footprint of objects smaller. So it is, it's not as heavy as you may think in some aspects, but on the GPU wise, so far my first contact is pretty heavy. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll have more on Unreal Engine 5 later, obviously, but I think we wanted to briefly touch on a review that you just finished up, Rich, on the 3080 Ti.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because fundamentally, we're in the middle of a massive GPU crisis where you can't really buy one. And NVIDIA releases a $1,200 GPU that's, approximately 10, 11, 12% faster than its $699 GPU. So, people are sort of kind of bemused. And I guess there's also questions about the scalping markup cost of that part. Questions of, why we're still getting new products when you can't buy the old ones. I fully understand all of that. 3080 Ti, it's a difficult one, because essentially we've gone back to the concept of the big chip NVIDIA product going onto the 80 line GPU, which we haven't seen since GTX 780. And essentially the value proposition has actually shifted significantly down towards that part rather than the Ti. The Ti was always the one that, it was the affordable Titan, the more affordable Titan. But the more affordable Titan this time is actually the RTX 3080. And of course, when I say more affordable, it's all about, whether you can actually buy one at all without, spending $2,000 on eBay. So there's this bizarre warped situation happening where it's like, hold on a minute, if I can get a 3080 Ti at MSRP, $1,200, that's better than paying $2,000 for a scalped 3080. This is just like a whole logistical minefield, really, and I have no idea what the solution is. I think EVGA have got an interesting idea where basically, if you've bought I'm not sure if you've bought a GPU from them in the past, but you can actually join a queue to buy a GPU. Obviously, these new GPUs don't work so well for Ethereum mining, so maybe that will help to lessen the stress somewhat. I think the bottom line is, looking at NVIDIA's financials, they're shifting every piece of hardware that they can physically make. And it looks, if you read through the numbers, it looks like the actual numbers of GPUs being produced are higher than Pascal in the same time period. So it's just this kind of perfect storm at the moment of mining, of global shortage. But I think it's just, we had no idea of the unprecedented level of demand. And next gen is here. And those older cards, Pascal in particular, just not really holding up anymore, for the latest games. But it's really difficult as a reviewer to understand the full implications, because we don't have to scour Discords waiting for product drops, at Newegg or Amazon or whatever. And I think that, we don't fully appreciate how difficult it is for PC gamers out there. I honestly don't have too many ideas on solutions for this, but hopefully things will ease up later on in the year. But in the meantime, I don't think we can expect reasonably NVIDIA and AMD and Intel, etc., not to release new products. It's not really the way it works, particularly the way with the binning situation is.
It's really dire, actually. And several of my friends actually have been trying to get 3080s since it launched, and now they're like looking at the 3080 Ti and people just can't get these things. It's really difficult. So I don't know. I don't think we've ever quite been in this situation before.
Yeah, I think the issue is that the 3080 Ti is so much more expensive than the 3080. It makes the 3080 even more desirable. That's the problem, particularly when the performance differentials and even the memory differentials aren't really that large. I couldn't justify the increase in MSRP between a 3080 and a 3080 Ti. With the 3090, it is the ultimate Halo product. The 24 gigs of memory does have a practical application. There is a reason for that product to exist. The 3080 Ti at $1,200 is a lot more difficult to justify.
And you look at something like the 3060 with its
12 gigs.
12 gigs. And the NVIDIA's product portfolio between the 3070, 3070 Ti, 3080, it's just so weird this time around. I think the 3080 is a really cool GPU. I like the 3090, but these are all, massive GPUs. I think, and the 3060's got some good stuff there, but I just don't like what they did with the memory situation this time around. They're kind of a little bit forced hand there, since they did go with GDDR6X, more expensive and things like that. I don't know, maybe AMD actually did the pretty smart route here, going for infinity cache and then, an older memory spec. Maybe that actually is something that will, have a lot of positives in the end, when people down the line a couple years from now are looking at their 8 gigabyte 3070 and being like, actually, this is not good enough for RT on at the same time as having highest end textures, which I think would be a big shame. I know I always hate having to turn down texture resolution of all the things in a game.
Yeah, so a lot of the ramifications of this are going to play out, as you say, over the next couple of years. But there is still this weird outlier, as you say, that the 3060, which is currently at the bottom end of the Ampere stack, has the same amount of memory as the $1,200 notional 3080 Ti. So there's a lot of weirdness going on there, and I think AMD's approach to memory does kind of make a bit more sense in terms of how that's all sort of panning out. But just all weirdness all around. But I just genuinely think that everything is just combining to make the 3080 just even more desirable, and I'm just wondering whether it's just going to drive up prices still further. I do think there needs to be some kind of distribution system along the lines of what EVGA are doing, that would actually ensure stock is being funneled through to the right people. I'll tell you what, and I don't mind waiting for stuff, right? Okay, I just need to know how long I'm waiting, right? That's the thing. So, because at the moment, I think that's the big problem. People have no idea when they're going to actually be able to get hold of this stuff. So if there was this queuing system where, even if it's just like a broadly accurate estimation on the conservative side, at least it gives something, people something to focus on. So yeah, I'm thinking there's going to be a lot of lessons learned from this. But I do think there is a semiconductor problem, production problem. There is a supply problem, but I honestly think also just the sheer level of demand is totally unprecedented. And, it's borne out on the console side as well. It just kind of hammers that one home.
Oof. Okay. That's a beefy answer, Rich. I like it. There's a lot to say about that, the 3080 Ti, and the general GPU market. But now that you've got that out of the way, it's time to relax and enjoy. Yes, it is. It's time for your favorite part of the show, the Q&A. As we do every week, we solicit questions from our captive patrons as they share their questions and thoughts with us via a system in which we can then place these questions into our document and answer them on the show. That's a complicated way of saying we're just going to read what they wrote us today, and we have, it looks like, roughly 6 questions to talk about today, and we're going to start up here at the top. This was sent in by Takeshi Shinobu, and he asks, maybe 4th time's charm, but we've yet to get a next generation racing game as far as I know. Considering the cumulative nature of ray tracing, are racing games like the upcoming Gran Turismo 7 and the next 2 Forzas at a ray tracing disadvantage compared to most other games, especially in lighting. That being said, how excited are you for GT7's photo mode?
Interesting.
Huh. This is interesting. What do you think, Alex?
Well, it depends on the design goals of the racing game. Racing games have to go for 60 FPS, I think, as a bare minimum, in my humble opinion, just because, if you're going
and I would have hoped
200
for this gen
kph,
we get 120.
Yeah, right. I think they're going to be targeting that too. If you're going really fast, you want that precision of fidelity for braking and turns and all these things. So it does limit what they can necessarily do on the console side of things. So I think Takeshi here is very right that they'll be not as advanced as your Metro 4A game, but they're very different games. I think we're going to see stuff like ray trace reflections,
Gran Turismo Sport had a tremendous lighting system already.
Yeah, right.
The way they simulated their GI with the time of day changing was really impressive for when it came out. So I do at least have expectations that we'll see something pretty outstanding there. And maybe this is actually that being a cross-gen game, as we now know, maybe this will actually mean that they can get it to 120, and that becomes a realistic goal.
It's kind of funny. They said 120 how many years ago for the first time when the PS3 came out, right?
I don't remember. I think
wasn't that a quote? I swear it was. Maybe
possibly.
They had a demo. They had a 240 frames per second demo for Gran Turismo back in the day. And it was done by daisy chaining PlayStation hardware. So that was just...
It might have been PS2, actually.
I think it was PS3. I might be wrong. But again, this is kind of why this whole concept of GT7 being a cross-gen game now, that is an example of Polyphony Digital aiming for the stars with hardware. They're doing stuff that isn't possible on today's hardware, but they're doing it because A, it's possible and looks cool, and B, it's research that they can, have ready for when the hardware is available. So, yeah, I mean, I'm sure GT7 will have ray-traced reflections, but what else they're going to do with it? And, this is, looking at this question, it's all about ray tracing, but I'm still more interested in what the concept is for what a next generation racing game actually is. Because as he says, we've yet to see one.
Actually, this is kind of my biggest thing is the state of racing games is depressing for me. I really like Dirt 5. I will say that's a really good arcade racing game, but I'd like more of those types of games. I really wanted a new Ridge Racer again. We're probably never going to get that again. And even the sim style racers, there's not a lot going on. I mean, probably the best stuff out there is something like, the Forza Horizon games have been phenomenal, but they're still different because they're open world based. So there's not a lot to scratch that itch of just getting in there and racing against AI opponents or online or whatever. And that's a real shame for me. I mean, and even EA was like, you know what, we got to get this Battlefield out the door. So we're just going to kick Need for Speed back again because, Battlefield. It just feels like racing is not being given the attention it used to get. And I guess I can see why, but it still doesn't make it any less disappointing.
Definitely.
But anyway, let's move on to the next question from Paul Kalamata.
Love that name.
He says, why do you think that both Sony and Microsoft partnered with AMD in both the 8th and 9th generation of consoles? Would there not have been a push to use chips from rival companies? And how could a console made with NVIDIA hardware have differed? This is one for Rich, I think, especially. What do you think, Rich?
Well, why they used it for the 9th generation of consoles is pretty straightforward. Just to leverage backwards compatibility, it's the easiest route forward. In terms of the 8th generation, it was basically the best combination of integration, area, performance. There's just nothing else available that could do it. And I think there was also a drive towards using an x86 core, which basically limits you to either Intel or AMD.
In terms of price performance, we joke about the Jaguar, but I don't think Intel actually had anything that could have fit what they needed at that specific time.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I mean, I literally did ask Mark Cerny why they went with Jaguar. And it was simply that there was nothing that was more performant within the Silicon area budget. And it was x86. And, it did hold back the generation. I think there's no doubt about it now. But at the same time, what developers actually got from these CPU cores designed for 2012 tablets is quite remarkable, I think.
It's amazing. Yeah. Also, he asks about, how would it have differed with NVIDIA hardware? But we've actually been there. I mean, every current console manufacturer has had a round with NVIDIA. I mean, PlayStation 3, the original Xbox, and now the Nintendo Switch. They've all taken a turn there. and I'm not sure.
Well, they never went back, did they?
No, except for, if Nintendo continues with the rumors on the Switch Pro, Switch, Super Switch, whatever. I mean, I guess technically that would still make it another, like, more of the Switch. So not a new generation per se, but they would have gone back to that at least.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think Switch is a different thing. I do think there is actually some interesting stuff that you can gain from the Switch, which is that you can use an ARM core to deliver a pretty decent console, which is something that I don't think had been proven before. And, ARM is in the ascendant in terms of, architectural leaps and bounds.
Looking at Apple Silicon right now.
Of
They're doing
course.
like the M1 stuff.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
So I'm actually really interested to see what is going to come next from NVIDIA and Nintendo with what the next Switch is. But I do note that, they've basically said our E3 showcase is going to be all about Switch games. And, they're kind of seem to be trying to dampen down any enthusiasm that's kind of emerged for Switch Pro. And
I'm sure it's a thing. It's just a matter of time whenever it fits into their marketing lineup, when they're ready to ship it. I don't know.
But what I do think, is that if there was, people were willing to totally break with the past and go full in on an NVIDIA console, I think it would be pretty awesome at this point. The NVIDIA home console, because the technology is, and the R&D budgets that are going into the core architectures, and if at that point they own ARM, then it's going to be it would be a really pretty impressive console, I think. But I just think at the same time, AMD, as I said earlier, in terms of their architectural boosts, they've really come on leaps and bounds. I mean, when we've seen what Big Navi delivered, just really impressive stuff. And RDNA 2 in general, it's only the ray tracing side and perhaps not being quite as forward looking on the machine learning side. It is fully featured. It's just not quite got the same balance as NVIDIA. And, there are certain limitations there. But again, I just keep saying about this, it's so early days with ray tracing. Pretty much all of the PC stuff has been optimized on NVIDIA hardware. What we've seen in the console space from Insomniac in particular with ray tracing, and hopefully with 4A with Metro when we get to see it on console. I mean, it's all looking pretty impressive there.
I agree. But let's move on to the next question. This one comes to us from Neon 5, but I should note it's spelled out in leet speak. It's N30NV.
Yeah.
So well done, Neon 5.
I put this question
right,
in especially for you, John.
Yeah. I can feel
Oh, yeah, my favorite topic. Is there a specific reason why DF doesn't cover cloud gaming services? If not Stadia, then what about xCloud and PS Now? And especially from the PC side, GeForce Now or Shadow or maybe more? For somebody whose life schedule does not allow proper PC gaming anymore, I have found that recent enhancements to some of these services does give an easy and accessible outlet to play and enjoy some of those PC games on TV and mobile devices, along with Xbox and PlayStation 5. Oh man, I mean, I don't want to cause any controversy here, but I mean, I think it's pretty clear that I'm not a fan of these services. The reasons are dense, they're difficult. I've explained them before, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be covered. The technology is interesting there. It's just the thing about the channel is that fundamentally, the video content by and large is driven by passion. When we make a video, it's usually because it's something we would like to make. There are exceptions, of course, but in general, that's kind of the rule because there's so much to cover. We can't cover everything, so why not pick the stuff that we really want to cover? And in this case, I think aside from maybe Tom, who's done some Stadia stuff, I mean, and Rich did an interesting one last year, but I don't really think any of us are really that interested in covering cloud gaming. Is that right? I mean, what do you guys think?
it is essentially, Stadia is slightly different, but all of those other services are essentially the PC version with reductions in image quality and increases in latency. So it's not actually that interesting because ultimately we just end up with image quality comparisons and latency tests, and it just doesn't really sound particularly interesting. Stadia is a bit more interesting because there's something going on server side which we don't know about. And I suppose if I really wanted to delve deeply into sources, or if they wanted to come forward and tell us, we could actually get the full hardware specification of a Stadia server instance and an answer to the question of why 10.7 teraflops of GPU compute produces an experience that's typically not as good as Xbox One X's GPU at 6. But that's kind of like the limit of my interest in Stadia at the moment. I do think that in terms of streaming technology, it's pretty impressive, and I am looking forward to seeing what xCloud is doing once the Scarlett chips are in the data centers. And I think that's something I'd be really interested in looking in. I mean, that's the funny thing, that was kind of like the big fact that dropped at the Microsoft presentation we had last March, John, where, the system architect just basically said, yeah, we've got this chip here. It can virtualize 4 Xbox One S's, So your Series X can run 4 Xbox One games simultaneously. This is huge.
That's pretty.
But
yeah, that's cool.
I'd love to see some kind of home. I mean, there isn't 4 video outputs, but I guess you could do four 1080p things on a 4K output. But I'd love to see that just as a tech demo.
I agree. There is a lot of interesting tech there. Fundamentally, I mean, for me personally, to be serious, I think cloud is an interesting additive thing. I think, it's offering this as a feature on top of the more traditional hardware-based at-home console or PC experience makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's why, xCloud or GeForce Now or PS Now and all of them, you're essentially able to take your library on the go, but then you also come back and play on original hardware. And I see more of a use case there than anything where it's like the entire platform is cloud-based. But at the same time, I often see these statements, like there was some article about somebody saying, oh yeah, when 5G hits, it's going to change gaming forever and everybody's only going to play cloud services. And there's always this focus on convenience over experience. And I know that there is definitely an element of convenience that can be important for some people, but why is everybody so obsessed with playing these games on a phone?
I don't even
understand
know.
it. At this point, we've pretty much discovered that the games people play on phones are tailored for phones, and there's a good reason for that. But why would you ever want to take one of these big game experiences just to say, oh, I can play it on my phone? Why would I ever play on a TV anymore?
Well, the reason we're hearing about it is because the addressable market is potentially, galactic, because so everybody has got a phone. The problem is that you've got to strap an enormous controller to it.
You got to do that. I mean, it's just it's just that these games aren't really made to be played that way, and that's what confuses me. It's like phone games they didn't take over the market, by the way, as people had predicted at the start of last generation, but they found their own very, very popular and successful niche, and that's great. But phone games are their own thing. There's a lot of amazing games that you can play on mobile, but developers have kind of dialed in like, okay, these are the types of concepts that work really well on the go on a mobile platform. And I don't think just bringing a home console or high-end PC game and being able to play it on a phone is really all that interesting or compelling.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe it is for some people, but that just seems like such a waste of everything somehow. I don't know.
Yeah,
all that tech to do that. Like, oh yeah, now I can play. I'm gonna play Metro Exodus on my phone.
Wow.
With no earphones. I'm just gonna play it here on the bus. Maybe I'll try touch controls.
Realize how terrible they are. Yeah.
That doesn't sound fun. I don't know. I'm a little out of touch on this because I don't. I've gone into the spiel, but that's the thing that mystifies me the most. And I know there's definitely markets, again, where phone gaming is huge and like the primary focus. But again, why would you want to play these high-end home experiences that way? Is that even fun? It's like this obsession people had for a while of like, I can watch whole movies on my phone, which is fine. Nothing wrong with that. But I feel like there is a significant difference in the overall experience you get there. And I don't mind that as an option, but this push to make that the future is what I find so baffling.
Yeah.
Well,
like,
I don't
as
think
an
the
option,
phone
it's
is
great. As the future, no.
I don't think the phone is the optimal device, but a Switch-like style device with an OLED screen, 7-inch, that you could stream onto, I think could work pretty well. Yeah. But it is at the moment additive, as you say, and it's not a replacement, certainly not here. But again, the eye is always, with these guys towards the emerging markets where they can't sell consoles.
Is that really true though? Like, I don't know. I mean,
Microsoft launched
a lot of
in
these
India, so yeah, it is true.
I know it's true. It's just, it's more like, it feels like a lot of consoles are still bought and played around the world in these other markets as well.
Well, they couldn't physically, they lose money on every console they make. So they're not going to get the rate of return from a market like India that would justify the cost of selling a console there. That's kind of like the game there. It's about addressing a global audience, but and again, that's where Game Pass comes in, which is another one of your favorite topics, John.
It's all right. It's all right. I don't mind it. But see, again, with their solution, though, I can appreciate that they're trying to build experiences that work across a wide range of platforms rather than saying we're moving everything over to phones. They're like, well, we're still developing these games in the traditional way for the home market. But if you want, you can also play it on all these other devices. And I think that's probably the best use case for streaming tech still. So that's okay. That's cool. All right, we should move on. The next question comes from Josh Donaldson. With so many games being made, 60 frames per second through backwards compatibility, and even cross-gen and next-gen games such as Demon's Souls having the option for 60 FPS, do you guys think this option will be more common throughout this generation, or will we see a slide back to 30 FPS as development moves to next-gen only? And I think this is the important thing. I actually went through the game list of every launch game on both of these new machines and also looked at what's released afterward. And the percentage, I don't have it offhand, but the overwhelming majority of games are 60 frames per second now, at minimum. So many of them have 30 FPS modes, certainly not all, but currently 60 FPS is the target in a way that we've not seen since the PlayStation 2. It certainly wasn't the case last gen. Last gen, they were trying to get to 60 FPS a lot with unlocked frame rates early on, but they never really got there. But I'm feeling really good about the state of things. What do you think about that, Alex?
Yeah, I think it's awesome. I do wonder a bit though. Like the person here is saying that when the games start targeting only next generation hardware and they realize, oh, we can do this on the CPU, or we can have this very interesting, expensive lighting simulation at a certain resolution, but it will make us have to target 30 FPS for the most consistent experience. I think there will be a slide as we go on.
I think there will be some.
There'll be a slide, but I think the taste of 60 is so good that a lot of developers will just say, you know what, we can leave that more expensive simulation for next gen. Maybe they'll say something like that.
We know that there's already games that are targeting 60 frames per second and featuring various ray tracing implementations.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
So
yeah. So
you have to make cuts, obviously, but it is still feasible to do this.
Yeah, for sure it is. Yeah. I mean, it just depends. Like, once again, it's all about what a game really wants to do. And I personally don't play games at 30, but I don't want to yell at a developer if they decide that their game on console is going to target 30, because that's their decision in the end, and you as a consumer just have the choice to not buy it. So
I guess the question is, why wouldn't it?
Right.
Why wouldn't it run at 60? Because, you've got immense scalability on the GPU side now. And when you're targeting 4K resolutions, that's such a gigantic load on the GPU that being able to offset pixels for frame rate is very much a thing. And it can be done very gracefully, as we've seen with the Insomniac games. So I guess the question is really what's happening on the CPU side that's going to be causing you to drop back to 30 frames per second.
I guess that's the big concern, is actually the Unreal Engine 5 developments, that seems pretty hungry at this point still. So I'll be curious to see what we get there.
Yeah. I just that's like the one area where you can't really scale as much in time. Like you can only do so much on the CPU if the game's basic design and function requires a certain level of CPU power. So that's one area we wouldn't see scaling as much. And I do wonder what developers can do in a 30 FPS envelope on something like a Ryzen style CPU, which, is good, has its limits, but it's really good. It's way better than what we had before. I would like to see what it looks like.
I think there is momentum towards 60 frames per second, though, and hopefully it will continue. And I think we've seen now that when a game isn't 60 frames per second, there's actually a bit of a backlash, and developers and publishers aren't usually keen on getting involved with that.
Yeah, I guess like Horizon being shown off at 30, I do wonder why they did that in the end, actually, because,
Well,
it would probably look really good at 60.
The best fidelity, yeah. I'd say, in terms of visuals. Yeah. But I guess that's the other thing, which, when we saw the original PlayStation 5 reveal, it was like, hold on a minute, just about everything's at 30 frames per second here. And it turned out that basically all of those games, pretty much all of them, were targeting 60 instead, or had 60 FPS modes. So, I'd say that there's a lot of optimism to be had going forward. And I also think developers prefer to target 60 based on the kind of things that we've seen talked about. So I'm optimistic.
120 frames per second is interesting, as it's not really a target that needed to be considered as widely before. I mean, VR needed very high frame rates, although, they still had asynchronous time warp. But I guess 120 kind of becomes the new big challenging level to hit in a way that maybe 60 was last generation. You know what I mean? And not to say that makes hitting 60 any easier per se, but it kind of shuffles things around in a way that I'm curious to see how it turns out there. But yeah, we'll see more as it goes on. So 2 more questions though. Let's go here. Next one comes from Oliver McKenzie. About 10 years ago, a rather infamous voxel-based unlimited detail graphics demo was released by an Australian company called Euclidean. Looking at UE5's nanite system, it seems to share some of the implementation details, sampling geometric detail based on output resolution, and limitations limited to static geo. What do you think about this, Alex?
They're actually, that's about it. That's the only thing that's similar between them. There's nothing else that is actually very similar between them. Like if you look at someone did a really nice high-level render doc overview of nanite over the weekend. I read and I posted it on my Twitter, and everyone should maybe take a look at it if you're interested. But it actually has a lot more similarities with like a meshlit system that you could do with mesh shaders or primitive shaders. So it is very, very different. And I think that company still exists now. I think they do maybe like professional ArcViz things. The whole problem back then with that Euclidean tech was that it wasn't at all lighting friendly or game friendly, because there wasn't any way to essentially get this into a game world state. Where you need to have moving objects, you need to have these things. Nanite actually does support at least moving objects in a really great way, and you can still fall back to other types of geometry for, deformable meshes. And just recently on their live stream again, they are actually doing some very serious research in getting nanite to apply to deformable meshes, as well as ones with alpha channel. So like masked alpha vegetation and things like that. We'll see what that happens, because that's like a large research input. But I think other than that, what you said there, Oliver, I think these are very, very different. This is way more practical and just a lot better. Yeah.
Matthew Maloney sends a question saying, or more like a comment, I guess. He says, The Race for a New Game Machine is one of the best books I've read. Kudos to John Linneman for the recommendation. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Have you guys ever tried to get an interview with David Shippey, the author and chief architect of the PlayStation 3 and 360 CPU for DF Retro? It would be awesome. I agree. That would actually be awesome. Maybe that's something we should look at, see if we can reach out to him if he's interested in chatting with us at some point.
I did read the book. I read it when I was on holiday a couple of years ago, and it is an awesome read, and I do highly recommend checking it out because just if you're not fully aware of this situation, essentially IBM partnered with Toshiba, I think it was, wasn't it, and Sony to produce the Cell CPU, and they had some really lofty goals for it. They were aiming for like a 5 gigahertz CPU, and obviously the novelty of the Cell setup was pretty intense, and you get to learn of the origins of the CPU. There's basically a complete lowdown of the relationship with Sony and Ken Kutaragi's demands, which set the project back. And then basically Microsoft got wind of the CPU core and said, hey, basically, we really want this CPU core. Don't worry about the SPUs, but this CPU core sounds really promising. And essentially IBM had Sony engineers working on the Xbox 360 CPU core. That's the big takeaway.
And they tried to keep them all in the dark, and in a way that's like, the way he described it made it sound ridiculously stressful. I love the anecdote about when the Microsoft engineers first showed up. They all come walking in, strutting into the elevator, wearing big green Xbox shirts. And like one of the Japanese Sony engineers kind of gets in, and he's just kind of looking around, and Dave is just like kind of sitting there like, oh my goodness. Because this was, they were kind of working both sides at this point in a way. Mm-hmm. And it's a crazy situation.
Yeah, and there was anecdotes in there about how they had bugs on the 360 CPU, and the implication was that Sony staff were helping to fix them. It is a pretty awesome book, and it was sold on this concept of just this totally preposterous story about basically IBM playing both sides. But it did seem to be the case. I did look into it a bit afterwards, and it did seem to be the case that David Shippey was kind of like saying, hey, actually, this book was actually about the story of the development of this CPU. But even, literally when you open the book and it describes what the book's about, it is about this whole playing both sides situation. Maybe we should reach out and try and talk to him, because I do think the story there leaves a lot of questions unanswered. But a lot of them are answered in this book, and I do highly recommend checking it out.
What I've always wanted to do for the channel is I did want to do a look back at Project Offset at some point, and I did get in contact with some of the developers who worked on Project Larrabee, but nothing ever resolved from that, because that takes a lot of coordination and a lot of time. But maybe that would be something also I would love to do as like a stream on the channel, and just talk with one of these people that worked on Larrabee, because that's also another totally random PS3. It just remind me of how exotic the PS3 was, and Larrabee was too. So,
We've come to the end of yet another DF Direct Weekly.
Mm-hmm.
Who's going to host next week? I do not know. It's a mystery. We'll find out when we get there, but that's how we do things over here. But thank you both for joining me on another weekly expedition.
Mm-hmm. It's been a pleasure.
Of course, John.
And of course, we will be back next week. This episode should have gone live on the Saturday. And if you're not part of the Patreon group, what are you waiting for? But you're also seeing this on Monday, no doubt, or sometime thereafter. But yes, to all of our patrons, of course, again, thank you very much for your support. We really appreciate everything. And yeah, it's a great community over there. And if you're on the fence, come check it out. There's some good stuff waiting for you, including that 3-hour episode on the launch of PlayStation 1, and soon early access to Tech Focus on Global Illumination. So lots of good stuff waiting. But that's all from us for now. So thanks for watching.